Netflix bets big on Jungkook. Is ARIRANG about to become the most personal era of his career? What happens when the world's most powerful streaming platform quietly places its biggest wager not just on a band, but on one man's emotional gravity? What if the comeback everyone thought would be about BTS as a group slowly reveals itself as a deeply personal portrait of Jungkook, no longer the golden maknae, but something far more complex, far more exposed, and far more dangerous to ignore? And what if the clues have been there all along, hidden in studio footage, creative silences, and the way Netflix chose to frame this return? Tonight, that question is no longer a whisper among fans. It is becoming the central narrative of BTS's return. Because Netflix is not just streaming a concert, Netflix is telling a story. And at the center of that story, Jungkook is standing under a spotlight that feels different from anything before. From the very first frame of the announcement, something felt unusual. Not louder, not flashier, more deliberate, more intimate. Netflix's collaboration with BTS, announced as a global live broadcast and documentary event, immediately positioned itself as more than a celebration. It felt like a confession waiting to unfold. And the title that keeps echoing across timelines, forums, and industry conversations is not accidental. ARIRANG. Why does that matter? Why does a traditional Korean folk song, known for its sorrow, endurance, and unresolved longing, suddenly define the most anticipated BTS album since their hiatus? And why does Jungkook's presence inside this era feel heavier, more dominant, more emotionally charged than ever before? To understand the magnitude of this moment, you have to rewind not to the hiatus itself, but to the silence that followed. When BTS entered their military hiatus in 2022, the narrative was framed as a pause, a necessary interruption, a promise of return. But for Jungkook, that pause became something else entirely. His solo era did not scream rebellion or detachment. Instead, it quietly questioned identity. Who is Jungkook when the choreography stops? When the group dynamic fades into the background? When the world looks at him not as the youngest member, not as the prodigy, but as an artist alone in a room with a microphone? Netflix, it seems, has been watching that question very closely. According to official announcements, Netflix will stream BTS The Comeback Live, ARIRANG, on the 21st of March 2026, broadcasting live from Gwangwoman Square, one of Seoul's most symbolically loaded locations. This is not a stadium chosen for acoustics alone. This is a historical landmark, a space of memory, protest, resilience, and national identity. The concert will celebrate the release of BTS's fifth album, ARIRANG, scheduled to drop one day earlier on the 20th of March 2026. But the concert is only half the story. 1 week later, on March 27, Netflix will release BTS The Return, a 1 hour and 31-minute documentary that promises unprecedented behind-the-scenes access to the making of the album. Netflix itself has framed it as the most intimate look at BTS's creative process since their hiatus began. And here is where the narrative begins to tilt subtly, but unmistakably toward Jungkook. Leaks, insider whispers, and carefully worded descriptions suggest that Jungkook appears unusually dominant in studio footage. Not dominant in an ego-driven way, dominant in presence, in time spent on screen, in emotional weight, in the way other members seem to orbit moments of his creative process. This is not accidental editing. Netflix does not leave narrative power to chance. The question now being asked across fan communities and industry circles is simple but explosive. Is Netflix betting on Jungkook as the emotional anchor of BTS's post-hiatus identity? And if so, what does that say about ARIRANG itself? The album's title is the first major clue. ARIRANG is not a word associated with celebration. It is associated with separation, longing, homeland, and survival through hardship. For generations, it has been sung as a quiet cry rather than a triumphant anthem. By choosing this title, BTS is signaling a shift away from invincibility and toward vulnerability. But within that vulnerability, Jungkook's arc feels uniquely positioned. Fans have long speculated that Jungkook has been caught between two identities, the flawless performer molded by the industry, and the introspective artist still discovering his voice. During the group's hiatus, that tension did not disappear. It intensified. And now, with ARIRANG, that tension appears ready to surface fully. Early descriptions of the documentary emphasize long studio sessions, minimal dialogue, and emotionally charged moments that linger rather than resolve. Sources suggest that Jungkook is shown revisiting old recordings, experimenting with vocal textures that strip away polish, and engaging in conversations that feel less like production meetings and more like therapy sessions with music as the medium. This is not the Jungkook of explosive high notes and perfect synchronization. This is Jungkook asking questions. Who am I after the pause? What does my voice mean now? And how much of myself am I willing to let the world see? Netflix understands the power of those questions. It has built careers on turning private struggles into global narratives. And by aligning itself with Jungkook at this moment, the platform is making a statement. This is not just a comeback. This is a redefinition. The scale of the event reinforces that belief. The free concert at Gwangwon Square is expected to draw approximately 200,000 fans on site, making it one of the largest music events in South Korean history. Globally, millions more will watch through Netflix, available in over 190 countries. The live show is directed by Hamish Hamilton, a name synonymous with cultural spectacle, known for helming events like the Super Bowl halftime show. Yet despite the scale, the emotional tone being teased is restrained, intimate, almost quiet. Why would a global phenomenon choose subtlety at its most visible moment? Because subtlety is where Jungkook's transformation lives. Throughout BTS's career, Jungkook has been defined by excellence, the perfect trainee, the reliable center, the member who could adapt to any concept. But excellence can become a cage, and ARIRANG feels like a deliberate attempt to step outside it. Fans analyzing teaser phrasing have noticed something striking. Language around Jungkook emphasizes process rather than performance, reflection rather than achievement, emotion rather than impact. These are not accidental word choices. They signal a narrative pivot from spectacle to substance. The documentary's very title, The Return, suggests more than a physical comeback. It implies returning to something lost, or perhaps returning as someone changed. For Jungkook, that return appears deeply personal. During the hiatus, while other members explored distinct artistic directions, Jungkook's path remained deliberately ambiguous. He released music, yes, but often with an undercurrent of searching rather than certainty. Interviews hinted at restlessness, at questions left unanswered, at a desire to grow beyond the expectations placed on him since adolescence. ARIRANG may be the moment those questions finally find a voice. Netflix's role in this cannot be overstated. By partnering directly with HYBE, the platform is not merely distributing content. It is shaping the narrative framework through which millions will interpret BTS's evolution. And in that framework, Jungkook is emerging not just as a member, but as an emotional lens. Social media reaction has been immediate and intense. Hashtags like #BTS, ARIRANG, and #BTS Comeback 2026 dominated timelines within minutes of the announcement. But beneath the celebration lies a current of speculation that feels different from past comebacks. Fans are not just asking what the music will sound like, they are asking what it will reveal. Is Jungkook ready to let go of the Golden Maknae label? Is he prepared to be seen as flawed, conflicted, and unfinished? And is Netflix amplifying that vulnerability because it understands that modern audiences crave authenticity more than perfection? The hints keep coming. Insiders describe scenes in the documentary where Jungkook remains in the studio long after others leave, replaying takes not to perfect them, but to understand them. Moments where silence stretches longer than dialogue, where emotion is implied rather than explained. This is risky storytelling. It demands patience from viewers. But it also creates intimacy. And intimacy is Netflix's currency. By framing Jungkook this way, the platform is effectively inviting viewers into his internal world. It is asking them not just to watch BTS return, but to feel the weight of what that return costs. For ARMY in Indonesia and beyond, the accessibility of this event adds another layer of impact. With the live concert available without additional cost to Netflix subscribers, fans are being invited into a global moment that feels both massive and personal. It is a shared experience, but one centered on individual emotion. And that is the paradox of ARIRANG. It is a collective song about individual longing, a national melody rooted in personal pain, a perfect metaphor for a group comeback anchored by a deeply personal journey. As March approaches, the questions grow louder. Will ARIRANG mark the end of Jungkook's transitional phase and the beginning of a more mature artistic identity? Will the documentary reveal tensions, doubts, and creative conflicts that BTS has never shown before? And will Netflix's gamble pay off by redefining not just how we see Jungkook, but how we understand BTS as artists beyond their mythology? One thing is certain: this is not a safe comeback. It is not designed to reassure. It is designed to reveal. And at the heart of that revelation stands Jungkook, no longer shielded by titles or expectations, but stepping forward as an artist willing to ask the hardest questions on camera. When the lights turn on at Gwanghwamun Square on March 21, the world will see BTS again. But when BTS The Return begins streaming on March 27, the world may finally see Jungkook, not as the youngest, not as the golden one, but as himself. And that perhaps is the biggest bet Netflix has ever made. And it is precisely at this point that the story becomes more dangerous, more compelling, and far more difficult to look away from, because what is beginning to surface is no longer a standard comeback narrative, but a slow, deliberate dismantling of identity, carried out consciously and in full view of a global audience. Industry insiders who have followed the production of this documentary point to one recurring detail that appears in every internal description. Jungkook is not framed as the visual center, but as the emotional axis. The camera does not chase him when he is flawless. It lingers when he hesitates. Netflix allows the silence to breathe. It lets uncertainty exist without rushing to resolve it. And for a global audience that has long associated Jungkook with reliability, precision, and near-mythical consistency, this choice feels quietly unsettling. Why would Netflix choose discomfort over safety? Why spotlight doubt when perfection is always sold so well? The answer may lie in a truth rarely spoken aloud. After the hiatus, BTS no longer needs to prove relevance. What they need is meaning, and Jungkook, more than any other member, stands at the threshold of that transformation. Several moments described as the most emotionally charged in BTS. The Return reportedly showed Jungkook speaking not about charts, choreography, or global reception, but about estrangement from his own voice, from expectations that once felt natural, from an image he no longer fully recognizes. There is no dramatic score underneath these scenes, no cinematic push toward tears. Instead, there is restraint, and that restraint is what makes the impact sharper. This is where Netflix's narrative instincts become impossible to ignore. The platform understands that today's global audience, shaped by exhaustion, oversharing, and years of curated perfection, craves process over polish. Viewers want to see cracks. They want to hear breath before sound. They want to know what happens when the camera stays on longer than it should. BTS The Return appears to be constructed entirely around that philosophy. Jungkook's prominence in the documentary does not erase the presence of RM, Jin, Suga, J-Hope, Jimin, or V. Instead, they function as emotional context, as witnesses, as mirrors reflecting Jungkook's internal shift. Descriptions from the production hint at long, unbroken scenes where words are minimal but meaning is dense. Glances held, pauses respected, moments allowed to exist without explanation. In one widely discussed internal moment, Jungkook is said to remain silent, while the other members talk about what coming back actually means after years of absence. The camera does not cut away. Netflix lets the stillness speak, and in that stillness, Jungkook's journey feels unmistakably central. Is this coincidence, or is it a clue? The title, The Return, itself carries an unsettling ambiguity. Return to what? The stage? The public eye? Or the self that existed before the world demanded answers? For Jungkook, the idea of return seems less about reclaiming a position and more about confronting what was left unresolved. And Netflix, with its long history of turning private reckoning into cultural moments, appears acutely aware of that narrative power. Online reactions reflect a complex emotional split. There is exhilaration. Yes, BTS is back together. But there is also a quieter unease. Fans are no longer just speculating about visuals or streaming records. They are asking harder questions. Are we ready to see BTS without the armor? Are we prepared to watch Jungkook step outside the role that made him untouchable? Discourse has shifted accordingly. Conversations now orbit around emotional transparency rather than performance dominance. Around whether Jungkook will finally speak about the pressure of being the most dependable, about the exhaustion hidden behind consistency, about whether ARIRANG